Sarah Chen stood in the big hall of the National Culinary Championship. Her hands held her old apron tight against her body. She looked around at all the other people who came to cook. They all looked so different from her. They wore white chef coats that were clean and new. They carried big bags full of expensive knives. Sarah knew those bags cost more money than she spent on food for a whole month. She worked in a school cafeteria in a small town. For 20 years, she had been serving food to children. She did not create fancy dishes. She just made simple food and put it on trays. When the people who ran the competition called her, they said her story was interesting. Sarah thought they really meant she would be funny to watch. They probably thought she would fail and people would laugh. A famous chef walked past her. This chef was on television all the time. He had many people walking with him. They all acted like he was very important. Sarah felt small. She wondered if coming here was a big mistake. Her hand started to shake a little bit. She tried to hold the papers steady as she wrote her name and information. The room was so loud. Everyone was talking. Some people were laughing with their friends. Others were looking at their expensive phones. Sarah heard someone talking about a restaurant in New York City. Another person was showing off pictures of food that looked like art. Everything around her felt too big and too fancy. She thought about her small kitchen at home. She thought about her tiny apartment where she lived alone. Every morning she woke up at 5 o'clock to go to work at the school. She made breakfast for hundreds of children. Eggs, toast, oatmeal, fruit. Nothing special. Nothing that would impress anyone here. A woman next to her in line started talking. She wore a beautiful chef coat with her name stitched on it in gold thread. "Is this your first competition?" the woman asked. Her voice was kind, but Sarah could tell she was just being polite. Sarah nodded. "Yes, my first one," she said quietly. The woman smiled. "Well, good luck. It is very hard. Most people do not make it past the first day." Then she turned away to talk to someone else. Sarah felt her heart beat faster. Maybe she should leave right now. Maybe she should go back home where things were safe and familiar. Nobody here expected her to be good. Nobody here thought she belonged. She was just a cafeteria worker. What was she thinking? But then she remembered why she came. She remembered her grandmother. Her grandmother had died 6 months ago. Before she died, she had held Sarah's hand and said, "You have a gift. Do not hide it forever. Show the world what I taught you." Sarah had promised her grandmother she would try. That promise was the only reason she filled out the application form. That promise was the only reason she was standing here now. Her grandmother had been an amazing cook. Back in China, before the family came to America, her grandmother had owned a restaurant. People came from far away to eat her food. She was famous for her noodles. She could make noodles so thin you could see through them. She could pull the dough into hundreds of perfect strands. It was like magic. When the family moved to America, everything changed. Her grandmother's fame meant nothing here. They needed money fast. They needed to survive. Her grandmother worked in a factory. Later, she cleaned houses. She never opened another restaurant. She never showed her skills to anyone. It made Sarah sad to think about it, but every weekend her grandmother taught Sarah the old ways. In their small kitchen, they would spend hours making noodles. Her grandmother's hands were patient and gentle. "Watch carefully," she would say. "This skill has been in our family for 200 years. You must keep it alive." Sarah learned every movement. She practiced until her arms hurt. She made mistakes over and over. But slowly, year after year, she got better. By the time she was 20 years old, she could make the noodles almost as well as her grandmother. Almost, but not quite. Her grandmother's skill was on a different level. After her parents died in a car accident, Sarah had to work. She had to pay bills. She had to take care of herself. She could not chase dreams of being a chef. Dreams did not pay rent. Dreams did not put food on the table. So she took the job at the school cafeteria. It was steady. It was safe. It was enough. Every Sunday morning, she still made the noodles in her kitchen. It was her way of talking to her grandmother, even though her grandmother was gone now. The apartment would smell like flour and salt. Her hands would remember every lesson. For a few hours each week, she felt connected to something bigger than her small life. Now she was here at this competition. She had used all her savings to pay for the trip. She had taken time off work. She had done something crazy and scary. The paper in her hands asked for her cooking experience. What should she write? 20 years serving mashed potatoes to middle school students? That would make everyone laugh. She wrote down the basics. She did not mention the school. She just said she worked in food service. It was not a lie. It just was not the whole truth. She handed the papers to the person at the desk. The person looked at her papers and smiled in a way that seemed sad. "Good luck," the person said, and Sarah could tell they did not think she had any chance. Sarah took her registration badge and walked toward the main ballroom. Her legs felt weak. Her stomach felt sick, but she kept walking. She thought about her grandmother's face. She thought about the promise she made. She had come this far. She could not turn back now. Tomorrow, the real competition would start. Tomorrow, she would have to cook against all these professional chefs. Tomorrow, she would probably fail and go home. But tonight, she was here. She had done the brave thing just by showing up. Her grandmother would be proud of that much, at least. She found a quiet corner and sat down. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice. "You are stronger than you know. You carry our family's gift. Trust yourself." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at all the confident people around her. They did not know her story. They did not know what she could do. Maybe that was okay. Maybe tomorrow she would surprise them. Maybe tomorrow she would surprise herself. The ballroom was the most beautiful room Sarah had ever seen. Big lights hung from the ceiling like stars. Cameras were everywhere, pointing at the stage from every angle. 200 contestants sat in rows of chairs, all facing forward. Sarah found her assigned seat and sat down carefully. She felt like she did not belong in such a fancy place. The person sitting on her right was a young man in an expensive chef coat. He had told everyone nearby that he went to a famous cooking school in Paris called Le Cordon Bleu. Sarah did not know what that was, but everyone seemed impressed. He talked very fast about things Sarah did not understand. Molecular gastronomy, spherification, foam techniques. The words meant nothing to her. On her left sat a woman who owned 3 restaurants in Manhattan. Sarah knew Manhattan was in New York City, one of the most expensive places in the world. The woman kept looking at her phone and sending messages. She did not look at Sarah even once. It was like Sarah was invisible. A loud voice came through the speakers. "Please welcome our head judge, Chef Dominique Laurent." Everyone started clapping. A tall man walked onto the stage. He had gray hair and wore a chef coat that looked like it cost $1,000. Sarah had seen him on television before. He was very famous. He had won so many awards that Sarah could not remember them all. Chef Laurent stood at the microphone. His voice was strong and serious. He had an accent from France. "Welcome to the National Culinary Championship," he said. "You are the 200 contestants who were chosen from 10,000 applications. But do not feel too proud yet. Tomorrow, only 50 of you will continue. The other 150 will go home." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew the competition would be hard, but hearing the numbers made it real. 3 out of 4 people would fail on the first day. She looked around at all the confident faces. Everyone here seemed so sure of themselves. She was probably going to be one of the people sent home. Chef Laurent kept talking. "This competition will test everything you know about cooking. We will test your skills with a knife. We will test your knowledge of flavors. We will test your ability to work under pressure. We will test your creativity. Only the strongest will survive." He paused and looked at all the contestants. Cooking is not just about following recipes. It is about passion. It is about soul. It is about respect for ingredients and respect for tradition. If you do not have these things, you will fail. Sarah listened carefully to every word. Passion, soul, respect for tradition. Those were things her grandmother had taught her. Maybe she did not go to fancy schools, but she had learned from someone who truly understood food. Maybe that counted for something. After Chef Laurent finished speaking, 2 other judges were introduced. One was a woman who had written famous cookbooks. The other was a man who owned hotels all around the world. They both said a few words, but Sarah barely heard them. She was too nervous thinking about tomorrow. Then the ceremony ended and everyone was told to go to the mixer. This was a time for contestants to meet each other and talk. Sarah did not want to go. She wanted to hide in her hotel room. But everyone was walking toward another room, so she followed. The mixer room had tables with food and drinks. The food looked amazing, small beautiful bites arranged on white plates. Sarah took a plate and put a few things on it. She stood in a corner trying to be invisible. Groups of people stood together talking and laughing. They all seemed to know each other already. Sarah heard bits of their conversations as people walked past her. A man was talking about his apprenticeship in Italy, where he learned to make fresh pasta. A woman was describing her restaurant in Los Angeles that had a waiting list of 3 months. Another person was showing pictures of a dish that had won an award. Someone walked up to Sarah. It was a young woman with bright red hair. "Hi, I am Jenny," she said with a smile. "What is your background?" Sarah held her plate tighter. "I work in food service," she said quietly. Jenny waited for more information, but Sarah did not say anything else. "Oh, that is cool," Jenny said, though her face showed she was confused. "Which restaurant?" Sarah felt her face get hot. "Just a cafeteria," she said. "I serve food." Jenny's smile became smaller. "Oh, okay. Well, good luck tomorrow." Then she walked away quickly to talk to someone else. Sarah felt embarrassed. She should not have come to the mixer. She should not have come to the competition at all. She put her plate down on a table and walked toward the exit. As she passed a group of people, she heard one of them say, "Did you see some of the people they let in? They just want drama for the television show. Half these people cannot really cook." Others in the group laughed. Sarah walked faster. Back in her hotel room, she sat on the bed and looked at her phone. She had a picture of her grandmother as the background. Her grandmother's face was smiling and kind. Sarah felt tears come to her eyes. "I do not think I can do this," she whispered to the picture. "Everyone here is so much better than me. They all went to schools and trained with famous chefs. I just learned in a small kitchen with you." She lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow morning she would have to cook for the judges. She did not even know what they would ask her to make. It could be anything. What if they asked her to make something French? She did not know French cooking. What if they asked for molecular gastronomy like that man was talking about? She did not even know what that meant. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her friend back home who worked with her at the cafeteria. "How is it going? Are you having fun?" Sarah did not know how to answer. She was not having fun. She was terrified. But she did not want to complain. "It is interesting," she typed back. "Very different from home." She got up and went to the bathroom. She washed her face with cold water and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired and scared. This was not how a champion looked. She thought about all those confident people downstairs at the mixer. They belonged here. They knew they belonged here. She was just pretending. But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say. "Sarah, skill is not about being loud. Skill is not about showing off. Skill is quiet. Skill is in the hands. When the time comes, your hands will remember everything I taught you." Sarah looked at her hands in the mirror. These hands had practiced for 15 years. Every Sunday morning making those noodles. Over and over and over. Thousands of hours of practice. Maybe she did not need to be confident like those other people. Maybe she just needed to let her hands do what they knew how to do. Her grandmother's skills lived in these hands now. That had to mean something. She went back to the bed and lay down. She set her alarm for 6 in the morning. The preliminary round started at 9. She needed to sleep. But her mind would not stop thinking. She thought about all the people who would go home tomorrow. She thought about the judges watching her cook. She thought about failing in front of cameras and everyone seeing it. But somewhere around midnight, tiredness finally won. Her eyes closed and she fell asleep. In her dreams, she was in her grandmother's kitchen again. She was young, maybe 10 years old. Her grandmother's hands were guiding her hands, showing her how to fold the dough. Gentle but firm, her grandmother was saying. "Feel the dough. Listen to what it tells you." In the dream, everything felt safe and right. Sarah slept and her hands rested on the pillow, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Sarah woke up before her alarm went off. It was still dark outside. She could not sleep anymore because her heart was beating too fast. Today was the day. Today she would either continue in the competition or go home. She got out of bed and took a shower. The hot water helped her feel a little bit calmer. She put on simple clothes, a clean pair of dark pants and a light blue shirt. She looked at her old apron that she had brought from home. It was faded and had small stains that would not come out no matter how many times she washed it. But it was the apron she always wore when she made her grandmother's noodles. She folded it carefully and put it in her bag. The hotel breakfast room was full of other contestants. Some people were eating big plates of food. Others just drank coffee and looked nervous. Sarah took a banana and some toast. Her stomach felt too tight to eat much. She sat at a small table by herself and tried to eat slowly. At 8:30, everyone had to go back to the big ballroom. When Sarah walked in, she saw that everything had changed from yesterday. Now there were cooking stations set up all around the room. Each station had a stove, a counter, and basic tools. There must have been 50 stations. Big cameras on wheels moved around the room. People with headsets were talking into microphones and pointing at different things. All 200 contestants stood in the middle of the room waiting for instructions. A producer with a clipboard stood on the stage. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "We have a small change in the schedule today." People started whispering to each other. Sarah felt worried. Changes were bad. She had already prepared herself mentally for one thing. Now it would be different. "We were supposed to start the preliminary round right at 9, the producer continued. "But one of our celebrity judges had a problem with their flight. They will not be here until 11. So we need to delay the preliminary round by 2 hours." Everyone started talking louder. Some people seemed relieved to have more time. Others seemed annoyed. Sarah did not know how to feel. 2 more hours of being nervous sounded terrible. "But we cannot waste time," the producer said. "We have cameras rolling and we need content for the show. So we have decided to do something special. We are going to have a demonstration session. Any contestant who wants to can volunteer to show a cooking technique to everyone. You will have the demonstration kitchen here at the front. You can show anything you want, any skill or technique that you are proud of." The room went completely quiet. Nobody moved. Sarah looked around at all the faces. Everyone looked nervous or uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to volunteer. It made sense. Why would anyone want to go first and maybe embarrass themselves in front of everyone? The producer waited. "Come on," she said with a big smile that looked fake. "This is a great opportunity. You can show the judges and other contestants what you can do. No pressure, no competition. Just a friendly demonstration." Still, nobody raised their hand. People looked at the floor or at their phones. Some people took steps backward like they were trying to hide. Sarah stood in the middle of the crowd. Her bag with her grandmother's apron was hanging on her shoulder. She thought about going back to her hotel room for 2 hours and being nervous the whole time. That sounded awful. She thought about her grandmother. What would her grandmother want her to do? Then something strange happened. Sarah felt like she could hear her grandmother's voice in her head, not really hearing it but feeling it. The voice said, "Show them. Do not hide anymore. This is why you came." Sarah's heart started beating even faster. Her hands felt cold, but the voice kept saying it. "Show them." Before she could think about it too much, before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah raised her hand up in the air. She raised it high so everyone could see. The producer's face changed from worried to excited. "Yes, we have a volunteer. Come on up." Everyone turned to look at Sarah. She could feel 200 pairs of eyes on her. Her face felt hot. Her legs felt weak, but she started walking toward the front of the room. The crowd of people moved aside to let her through. Some people looked surprised. Others looked relieved that they did not have to volunteer. As Sarah walked, she heard whispers behind her. "Who is that? I do not know her. She must be brave. Or crazy." Sarah kept walking until she reached the demonstration kitchen on the stage. It was a beautiful kitchen with shiny counters and professional equipment. Bright lights pointed at it from every direction. 3 big cameras moved closer to film her. The producer came up to her with a big smile. "Thank you so much for volunteering," she said quietly so only Sarah could hear. "What is your name?" Sarah told her. "And what are you going to demonstrate?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I need some simple ingredients," she said. "Flour, water, salt, and a rolling pin." The producer looked confused. "That is all?" Sarah nodded. "That is all I need." The producer spoke into her headset to someone. A few minutes later, someone brought out a bag of flour, a pitcher of water, a small bowl of salt, and a wooden rolling pin. They put everything on the counter in front of Sarah. The producer spoke into her microphone. "Everyone, please take your seats. We are about to begin our first demonstration." All the contestants sat down in the chairs that were arranged facing the stage. Sarah could see their faces clearly now. Some people looked curious. Some looked bored. Some looked like they wished they were somewhere else. The 3 judges sat in the front row. Chef Laurent was looking at his phone and not paying attention. Sarah opened her bag and took out her grandmother's old apron. She put it on and tied it behind her back. The moment she did this, she felt different. She felt like she was back in her small kitchen at home on a Sunday morning. The nervousness started to feel smaller. Her hands stopped shaking. She poured flour onto the counter. She made a little mountain of it. Then she made a hole in the middle of the mountain with her finger. She poured water into the hole, just the right amount. She added a pinch of salt. Then her hands went into the flour and started mixing. This was something she had done 1,000 times. Her hands knew exactly what to do without her having to think about it. The dough started to come together. Sarah kneaded it, pushing and folding, pushing and folding. The room was very quiet now. People were watching her hands move. Even Chef Laurent had looked up from his phone. Sarah kneaded for exactly the right amount of time. Not too little, not too much. When the dough felt perfect, she covered it with a cloth and let it rest. While the dough rested, Sarah looked out at the audience. So many people watching her. Cameras pointing at her. This should have made her scared. But instead she felt calm. She felt like her grandmother was standing right next to her, guiding her hands like always. After 15 minutes, the dough was ready. Now came the hard part. Now came the part that would show everyone what her grandmother had taught her. Sarah took the rested dough and started to stretch it. Gently at first, then with more confidence. She pulled it and folded it. She stretched it into a long rope shape. Then she did something that made people lean forward in their seats to see better. She started to pull the noodles. Her hands moved so fast and so smooth. The dough split into 2 strands. Then those 2 became 4. Then 4 became 8. Her arms stretched wide, then came together, then stretched again. Each movement was perfect. Each pull was exactly the right strength and speed. The dough kept splitting and splitting. 8 became 16. 16 became 32. Sarah's hands were like a dancer's hands, moving in a pattern that looked almost like magic. Nobody in the room was looking at their phones anymore. Nobody was whispering. Everyone was frozen, watching her hands create something beautiful. Even the camera operators seemed to forget to move. They just filmed and watched. Chef Laurent slowly stood up from his seat, his mouth slightly open, his eyes fixed on Sarah's hands. And Sarah kept pulling, kept creating, her grandmother's ancient skill flowing through her like water. Sarah's hands continued their dance with the dough. 32 strands became 64. The noodles were getting thinner and thinner, but they did not break. Each strand stayed perfect and even. This was the part that took years to learn. This was the part that separated someone who knew the technique from someone who had truly mastered it. Her arms stretched wide apart, holding the growing bundle of noodles. Then she brought her hands together and looped the strands. She stretched again, and the 64 strands became 128. The noodles caught the bright stage lights and seemed to glow. They looked like silk threads, like spider webs, like something too delicate to be real. The ballroom was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own breathing. She could hear the soft swish of the dough as it moved through the air. She could feel the attention of 200 people focused completely on her hands, but she did not let it distract her. She had learned long ago that this technique required total concentration. One wrong move, one moment of too much tension or too little, and the noodles would break. She did one more pull, the final pull. The 128 strands became 256. The noodles were now as thin as hair. You could almost see through them. They hung from her outstretched hands like a waterfall, like rain frozen in midair. Sarah held them there for a moment, letting everyone see what 15 years of Sunday mornings had created. Then she gently laid the noodles on the counter. They pooled there in soft waves, each strand separate and perfect. Sarah's arms felt tired, but it was a good tired. She had done it. She had shown her grandmother's skill to the world. She looked up at the audience for the first time since she started pulling the noodles. Every single person was staring at her. Some people's mouths were open. Some people were leaning so far forward in their seats they looked like they might fall. The cameras had moved in close to film the noodles on the counter, and the 3 judges in the front row all had the same expression on their faces. Shock. Pure, complete shock. Chef Laurent was still standing. He had stood up at some point during the demonstration, and now he just stood there, not moving. His eyes were wide. His face had gone pale. He looked like someone had just told him something impossible was true. The other 2 judges sat frozen in their seats, their heads turned toward the demonstration kitchen, their expressions matching his. The silence stretched on and on. It became uncomfortable. Sarah started to wonder if she had done something wrong. Maybe this was not impressive to them. Maybe they saw this kind of thing all the time. Maybe she had embarrassed herself after all. She started to feel nervous again. Then Chef Laurent moved. He walked very slowly toward the demonstration kitchen. His steps were careful, like he was in a dream and might wake up any second. He came up to the counter and looked down at the noodles. He did not touch them at first. He just looked. His eyes moved over each strand, studying them. Sarah stood very still and waited. Finally, Chef Laurent reached out and picked up a single noodle strand. He held it up to the light. The noodle was so thin that the light shined through it. He held it close to his eyes and examined it carefully. Then he put it down gently and turned to look at Sarah. His face was very serious. "May I see your hands?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but everyone could hear it because the room was so silent. Sarah held out her hands, palms up. Chef Laurent took her hands in his and turned them over slowly. He looked at her palms, her fingers, her wrists. He was looking for something. Sarah did not know what. Maybe he thought she had used some tool or trick, but there was nothing to find. Just her hands, strong from years of work, but normal hands. Chef Laurent let go of her hands and took a step back. He turned to face the audience. One of the cameras moved to film his face. "I need to tell you all something," he said. His French accent seemed stronger now. His voice had emotion in it that had not been there during the opening ceremony. "I have been cooking for 40 years. I have traveled to 60 countries. I have trained with masters from every culture. And I have seen this technique, this specific hand-pulled noodle technique, only 3 times in my entire life." He paused. The room was completely silent. Everyone waited for him to continue. "The first time was in China 25 years ago," he said. "I watched a master who had trained for his entire life, 50 years of practice. The second time was also in China 15 years ago. Another master, also with a lifetime of training. The third time was in Italy 10 years ago. An old woman whose grandmother had taught her, and that grandmother had learned from her grandmother. She told me she had practiced every single day for 50 years. Chef Laurent turned back to look at Sarah. "This technique cannot be learned from books. It cannot be learned in cooking school. It takes thousands of hours of practice. It takes a teacher who knows the ancient ways. It takes dedication and patience and love for the craft." He looked at the noodles on the counter again. "These noodles are perfect. Not almost perfect. Not good for someone learning. Perfect like the masters I saw." He picked up his microphone from his seat and spoke into it so everyone could hear clearly. "I am 62 years old. I have 3 Michelin stars. I have trained hundreds of chefs. I have judged cooking competitions around the world. And I am telling you all, what we just witnessed is one of the rarest skills in the culinary world. This is not just cooking. This is art, this is history. This is tradition kept alive through dedication." The other 2 judges stood up and came to the demonstration kitchen. They looked at the noodles, too. They touched them gently, carefully. The woman judge who wrote cookbooks had tears in her eyes. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "I have never seen anything like this in person." Chef Laurent turned back to Sarah. "You must tell us your story," he said. "Where did you learn this? Who taught you? This skill does not just appear. Someone gave this to you. Someone trained you." Sarah felt her throat get tight. She had not planned to tell her story. She had just wanted to show the technique. But now everyone was waiting. The cameras were pointed at her face. 200 people were looking at her, waiting to hear. She took a breath and started to speak. Her voice was shaky at first, but then it got stronger. "My grandmother taught me," she said. "Back in China, before my family came to America, my grandmother was famous for her noodles. She had a restaurant. Important people came to eat there. Her skill was known across the whole province." Sarah looked down at her hands as she talked. "But when we came to America, that fame meant nothing. We needed money to survive. My grandmother worked in a factory. Later she cleaned houses. She never opened another restaurant. She never showed her skill to anyone. It was like all those years of training, all that knowledge was just lost." She felt tears starting to come to her eyes, but she kept talking. "My parents died when I was 20. I had to work to pay bills. I could not go to cooking school. I could not follow dreams. I took a job at a school cafeteria. I have worked there for 20 years, serving food to children. Simple food, nothing special." The room was so quiet Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. "But every Sunday morning I make these noodles," she continued. "In my small kitchen alone. My grandmother taught me every weekend for 15 years. She made me promise to keep the skill alive. She said it had been in our family for 200 years. She said I could not let it die. So I practiced every week for 15 years, even though nobody saw it. Even though it did not matter for my job, I practiced because I promised her. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. She did not wipe it away. My grandmother died 6 months ago. Before she died, she told me I should not hide anymore. She said I should show the world what she taught me. She said tradition deserves respect, even if it comes from a simple person. So I applied to this competition. I did not think I would be chosen, but I was. And I came here to keep my promise to her, to show that her skill was real, to show that it mattered. Sarah finally looked up at the audience. Many people had tears in their eyes too. Some people were nodding their heads slowly. Chef Laurent stood very still, listening to every word. When Sarah finished speaking, he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears. He turned to the other judges and they talked quietly together. Sarah could not hear what they were saying. Sarah stood at the demonstration counter, her grandmother's apron still tied around her waist. The beautiful noodles lay on the counter like a work of art. Her hands rested at her sides, tired from the work but steady. She watched as Chef Laurent and the other 2 judges talked quietly together. Their faces were serious. Sometimes one of them would look at the noodles, then back at each other, then continue talking. The audience of contestants sat frozen in their seats. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. It was like time had stopped in the big ballroom. The camera operators stood with their cameras still pointed at Sarah, but even they seemed to have forgotten to move. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Chef Laurent finished talking with the other judges. He nodded at them, then turned to face Sarah again. His expression was different now. The shock was gone, but it had been replaced with something else. Something that looked like respect mixed with wonder. He stepped closer to the demonstration counter and looked at the noodles one more time. Then he did something unusual. He reached out and took Sarah's hands again. This time his touch was gentle, almost reverent. He turned her hands over and over, looking at them the way someone might look at a precious object. "These hands," he said quietly, though the microphone picked up his words, "have more training than most professional chefs will ever receive. These hands have been taught by a true master. These hands carry history." He let go of her hands and stepped back. He looked out at the audience of 200 contestants. "I need everyone to understand what we just witnessed," he said, his voice growing louder and more passionate. "This is not a trick. This is not something you can learn from watching videos online. This technique requires a teacher who knows it perfectly. It requires years, not months of daily practice. It requires dedication that most people cannot imagine." Chef Laurent picked up one of the noodle strands again. He held it up so everyone could see how thin it was. "This noodle is thinner than the finest pasta you can buy in any store. It is thinner than most people could make with a machine. And she made hundreds of them, all exactly the same thickness using only her hands." He put the noodle down carefully. "This is mastery. True mastery." He looked at Sarah again. "You said your grandmother was famous in China. What was her name? What was the name of her restaurant?" Sarah told him. Chef Laurent's eyes grew even wider. He said something in French that Sarah did not understand. Then he switched back to English. "I have heard of her. When I was training in Hong Kong many years ago, other chefs spoke of her with great respect. They said her noodles were legendary. They said she could pull noodles so thin you could read through them like glass." Sarah felt her heart jump. "You knew about my grandmother?" she whispered. Chef Laurent nodded. "Not personally. But I knew of her reputation. In the culinary world, certain masters become legendary. Their skills are talked about for generations. Your grandmother was one of those masters." He paused. "And now I understand. You did not just learn this technique. You learned it from one of the greatest practitioners who ever lived." The room erupted in whispers. Contestants turned to each other, talking quietly. Some people pulled out their phones and started typing, probably searching for information about Sarah's grandmother. Sarah felt overwhelmed. She had not known that her grandmother's fame had spread so far. Her grandmother had never talked about it much. She had been humble, always saying the past did not matter anymore. Chef Laurent raised his hand and the room went quiet again. "I need to consult with my fellow judges and with the producers," he said. What we have witnessed here is extraordinary. It changes things. He looked at the two other judges and they nodded in agreement. Then he looked at the producer with the clipboard who was standing at the side of the stage. The producer looked surprised but excited. "Please," Chef Laurent said to Sarah, "stay here for a moment. Do not leave the stage." Then he walked off to the side where several producers were standing. The other two judges followed him. They formed a circle and started talking intensely. One producer was speaking into a phone. Another was gesturing with their hands, looking excited. Chef Laurent was talking fast, his hands moving as he made his points. Sarah stood alone at the demonstration kitchen. She did not know what to do. The audience was still sitting there, watching everything. Some people were smiling at her. Others looked confused. A few looked upset, though Sarah did not know why. The cameras kept filming everything. One camera stayed focused on Sarah's face. Another camera focused on the judges and producers having their discussion. A third camera filmed the audience reactions. Minutes passed. 5 minutes, then 10. The discussion continued. At one point, one of the producers seemed to be disagreeing with Chef Laurent. They were shaking their head no. But Chef Laurent kept talking, his voice getting louder. Sarah could not hear the words, but she could see he felt strongly about something. Finally, the producer nodded, though they did not look completely happy about it. The judges and producers walked back to the demonstration kitchen together. Chef Laurent was in front. His face looked determined. He picked up his microphone and turned to face the full audience. The room went completely silent again. Sarah's heart was beating so fast she thought everyone might be able to hear it. "In the 40 years I have been a professional chef," Chef Laurent began. "In the 20 years I have been judging cooking competitions, I have never done what I am about to do. But I have also never seen what I saw here today." He paused and looked at Sarah. "What you demonstrated here is not just a cooking skill. It is a cultural treasure. It is a piece of living history. It represents thousands of hours of training and dedication. It represents a tradition kept alive against all odds." He turned back to the audience. "The rules of this competition say that everyone must complete the preliminary round. The top 50 scores will move forward. But today we are making an exception that will only be made once." The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah felt dizzy. She did not understand what was happening. Chef Laurent looked directly at Sarah. "You are being advanced directly to the final 50. You do not need to compete in the preliminary round. You have already shown us more skill in 10 minutes than most people could show in 10 competitions." The room exploded with noise. People gasped. Some people started clapping. Others shouted questions. The cameras swung around wildly, trying to capture all the reactions. But Chef Laurent was not finished. He raised his hand for quiet again. It took a while, but eventually the room settled down. "There is more," he said. "Regardless of how you perform in the rest of this competition, whether you win or lose, I am offering you a full scholarship to my culinary institute in Paris. I want you to teach this technique to my students. I want you to preserve your grandmother's legacy properly. I want the world to learn about this tradition." Sarah could not breathe. She could not think. The words did not make sense. Scholarship? Paris teaching? Her legs felt weak. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. Chef Laurent smiled at her, a real warm smile. "You do not need to answer now," he said gently. "Take your time. Think about it. But know that this offer is real and it will not expire." The woman judge who wrote cookbooks stood up. She was crying openly now. "I want to say something too," she said into her microphone. "I have been writing about food for 30 years. I have written 23 books. I have tried to document and preserve cooking traditions from around the world. And what you did today is exactly why I do this work. You kept something alive that could have been lost forever. You honored your grandmother's memory in the most beautiful way possible. Thank you." The third judge, the man who owned hotels, also stood. "I agree with everything that has been said," he added. "This is why we have this competition. Not just to find the best chef, but to find people who truly understand what food means, who understand that cooking is about more than just eating. It is about culture, family, history, and love." The audience started clapping, slowly at first, then louder and louder. People stood up from their seats. Soon everyone was standing and clapping. Some people were cheering. Sarah stood there in her grandmother's old apron, tears streaming down her face, completely overwhelmed. This was not what she had expected. She had come here thinking she would probably fail and go home. Instead, everything had changed in just a few minutes. Chef Laurent came close and spoke quietly to her away from the microphone. "Your grandmother would be very proud," he said. "You kept your promise to her. You showed the world what she taught you, and now her legacy will continue." Sarah could not speak. She could only nod and cry. He patted her shoulder gently, then stepped back. The producer with the clipboard came onto the stage. "We are going to take a 15-minute break," she announced to the audience. "When we return, we will begin the preliminary round for the remaining contestants. Sarah, you can go back to your seat or return to your hotel room if you prefer. You do not need to stay for the preliminary round since you have already advanced." Sarah nodded, still unable to speak. The cameras finally stopped filming. The bright lights dimmed slightly. The audience started moving around, standing up and stretching. Many people came up to Sarah to congratulate her. Sarah wiped her eyes. "I am not sure I can compete with these people. They went to fancy schools. They have so much more knowledge than me." Chef Laurent smiled. "You have knowledge they will never have. You have spent 15 years learning one technique to perfection. Most chefs today spend 2 years in cooking school learning 100 techniques poorly. I would rather have one master than 100 amateurs." The 3 judges stood to leave. As they walked to the door, the woman judge turned back. "Sarah, your grandmother is watching you." "I believe that. And I believe she is very, very proud." Then they left, closing the door gently behind them. Sarah sat alone in the quiet room, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "Show them. Do not hide anymore." Sarah stayed in the small room for a while longer, trying to process everything that had happened. It felt like a dream. Just a few hours ago, she was terrified and nervous, sure she would embarrass herself. Now 3 famous judges were calling her a cultural treasure. It did not seem real. She touched her grandmother's apron, feeling the worn fabric. "Did you see that, Grandma?" she whispered. "Did you see what happened?" After about 30 minutes, Sarah decided to go back to the ballroom. She wanted to see the preliminary round. She wanted to watch the other contestants cook. When she walked back in, the preliminary round had already started. All the cooking stations were full of people working. The room smelled like garlic, onions, and herbs. Cameras moved between the stations, filming different people. The judges walked around, watching and taking notes. Sarah found an empty seat near the back. A few people noticed her come in and whispered to each other, pointing at her, but most people were too focused on their own cooking to pay attention. Sarah watched as contestants chopped vegetables, stirred pots, and plated dishes. They all looked confident and skilled. They moved quickly and efficiently. Sarah felt a mix of admiration and intimidation. The contestant at the station nearest to her was making something with foam and tweezers, carefully placing tiny drops of sauce on a white plate. It looked like art. Sarah had never made anything that looked like that. At another station, someone was using a blowtorch to finish a dessert. At another, someone was preparing raw fish with perfect knife cuts. All around her, people were doing things she did not know how to do. An hour passed. The preliminary round ended. The judges collected all the dishes and took them to a private room to taste and score them. The contestants stood around nervously, waiting for results. Sarah stayed in her seat watching. Some contestants came over to her. A young man with kind eyes said, "What you did this morning was amazing. I have never seen anything like it." Sarah thanked him quietly. A woman with short black hair said, "My grandmother was from China too. She used to tell me about the old masters who could make noodles like that. I always thought it was an exaggeration. But you did it for real." Sarah smiled. "It is real. It takes a very long time to learn, but it is real." Not everyone was friendly, though. One man walked past her and muttered something under his breath. She could not hear exactly what he said, but his tone was angry. A woman nearby rolled her eyes when someone mentioned Sarah's name. Sarah understood. They were upset that she got to skip the preliminary round. They thought it was unfair. Maybe it was unfair. But Sarah had not asked for special treatment. She had just shown what she could do. After 2 more hours, the judges came back. They had scored all the dishes. A producer stood on the stage with a microphone. "We will now announce the 50 contestants who will move forward to the next round," she said. The room went completely silent. Everyone held their breath. The producer started reading names. Each time a name was called, that person sighed with relief or jumped with joy. Other people's faces fell with disappointment. Sarah listened to the names. Some of the friendly people who had talked to her were called. The young man with kind eyes made it through. So did the woman with the short black hair, but many people did not make it. The man who had muttered angrily at Sarah was not called. Neither was the woman who rolled her eyes. Sarah felt bad for them, even though they had not been kind to her. When all 50 names were read, including Sarah, who was automatically advanced, exactly half the room was happy and half was devastated. The people who did not make it had to leave. Some of them cried. Some of them looked angry. Some just looked tired and defeated. Sarah watched them pack up their things and walk out. She thought about how easily she could have been one of them. The 50 who remained were told to come back tomorrow for the next round. They would have a more difficult challenge. The competition would get harder and harder until only one person remained. Sarah walked back to her hotel, her mind full of thoughts. In her room, she sat on the bed and called her friend from the cafeteria back home. "Sarah, how did it go?" her friend asked excitedly. Sarah told her everything. The demonstration, the judge's reaction, Chef Laurent's offer, everything. Her friend screamed so loud Sarah had to hold the phone away from her ear. "This is amazing. This is like a movie. I am so proud of you." They talked for an hour. It felt good to share the story with someone who knew her real life. Someone who knew about her tiny apartment and her early morning shifts and her quiet Sunday morning practice sessions. When they hung up, Sarah felt more grounded. She was still the same person she was yesterday. What happened today did not change who she was inside. That evening, Sarah's phone started buzzing with notifications. She looked at it, confused. Someone had posted a video of her demonstration online. It was already going viral. Thousands of people had viewed it. Hundreds of people were leaving comments. Sarah read some of them. Most were positive. "This is incredible. True mastery. I could watch this forever." But some were negative. "This competition is rigged. She probably used a machine when nobody was looking. Why does she get special treatment?" Sarah put her phone down. She could not control what people said online. She could only control her own actions. Tomorrow she would have to cook something else. She would have to prove that she deserved to be here. The hand-pulled noodles were her specialty, but she needed to show she could do more than one thing. She lay in bed but could not sleep. Her mind kept replaying the day. Chef Laurent's shocked face. The audience standing and clapping. The feel of the dough splitting perfectly in her hands. Her grandmother's voice in her head saying, "Show them." At some point, exhaustion finally won and she fell asleep. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling different. Yesterday's fear was gone. It had been replaced by something else. Determination. She had shown the world her grandmother's gift. She had kept her promise. Now she could relax and just do her best. Win or lose, she had already accomplished what she came here to do. She went down to breakfast and sat with some of the other contestants. They talked about their backgrounds and their cooking philosophies. Sarah listened more than she talked, learning from them. The young man with kind eyes, whose name was David, asked her what other dishes she knew how to make. Sarah had to think about it. She knew simple Chinese home cooking. Rice, stir-fries, soups, dumplings. Nothing fancy. Nothing with foam or tweezers. "That is okay," David said. "Home cooking is good cooking. The best food in the world is made by grandmothers in their kitchens, not by fancy restaurants." Sarah appreciated his kindness. The woman with short black hair named Lisa agreed. "Honestly, I am tired of overly complicated food. Sometimes I just want something simple and delicious that makes me feel comfortable." When they arrived at the ballroom for day 2, the atmosphere was different. Only 50 people now instead of 200. More space. More attention on each person. The judges entered and Chef Laurent went to the microphone. "Today's challenge is called comfort food. You must create a dish that represents comfort to you. It can be from any culture, any tradition, but it must be authentic. It must have soul. You have 3 hours. Begin now." The contestants rushed to their stations. Sarah stood still for a moment, thinking. Comfort food. What represented comfort to her? She thought about coming home from school as a child. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen. She thought about the smell that always made her feel safe and loved. Egg and tomato stir-fry over rice. It was the simplest dish in the world. But it was perfect. Sarah went to the ingredient station and gathered what she needed. Eggs, tomatoes, scallions, garlic, soy sauce, rice. Basic ingredients that cost almost nothing. She saw other contestants grabbing lobster, truffle oil, expensive cuts of meat. Her simple ingredients looked poor in comparison, but she trusted her instinct. Comfort was not about expensive ingredients. It was about love and memory and home. She cooked the way her grandmother taught her. Not fancy, not complicated, just clean technique and respect for the ingredients. She tasted and adjusted. She remembered every lesson. When time was called, her dish looked simple. Just colorful stir-fry over white rice in a plain bowl, next to the other dishes with their tall presentations and fancy garnishes. Hers looked like peasant food. But when Chef Laurent tasted it, his eyes closed. He took another bite. Then another. He looked at Sarah. This tastes exactly like something my Chinese neighbor used to make for me when I was a young man training in Hong Kong. It was the first thing I ate when I arrived in that city. Exhausted and overwhelmed, it made me feel welcome. It made me feel home. His eyes were wet. This is perfect comfort food. The other judges tasted it too. They both loved it. The woman judge said the eggs were cooked perfectly, silky and soft. The man judge said the balance of sweet tomato and savory soy was ideal. Sarah had not tried to impress them with complexity. She had just cooked with her heart. And somehow that was enough. At the end of the day, the judges announced who would continue and who would go home. Sarah's name was called to continue. So was David's and Lisa's. 25 people were eliminated. The competition was getting smaller. The pressure was getting bigger. But Sarah felt calm. She had found her place in this competition. She was not trying to compete with the fancy techniques anymore. She was just cooking the way her grandmother taught her. Honest food. Simple food. Food made with love. Over the next week, the competition continued. Each day new challenges. Each day some people went home. Sarah kept cooking simple dishes with perfect technique. A soup, a dumpling, a braised dish. Nothing fancy. But every judge could taste the years of practice in her hands. They could taste the tradition and respect in every bite. She did not win every challenge, but she never came in last. She was consistent. She was authentic. She was herself. Finally, only 5 contestants remained. Sarah, David, Lisa, and 2 others. They were given the hardest challenge yet. Create a complete meal that told their personal story. 4 courses. 5 hours. Sarah knew exactly what to make. She would make the meal her grandmother used to cook for special occasions. Soup with hand-pulled noodles, of course. Dumplings shaped the old way. Stir-fried greens. And a sweet red bean dessert. It was not modern. It was not trendy. But it was her truth. As she cooked, she felt her grandmother's presence stronger than ever. Her hands moved with confidence. She was not the scared cafeteria worker who walked into this building 2 weeks ago. She was a keeper of tradition. She was a master in her own right. She was honoring her grandmother's memory in the best way possible. When the judges tasted her meal, all 3 of them stood up and applauded. Chef Laurent had tears streaming down his face. "This is not just food," he said. "This is love made visible. This is history we can taste. This is everything cooking should be." The woman judge hugged Sarah. The man judge shook her hand for a long time, not letting go. Sarah did not win the competition. David won, with his creative modern techniques, but Sarah came in second place. And more importantly, she had achieved something bigger than winning. She had shown the world that her grandmother's skills mattered. She had proven that tradition deserved respect. She had kept her promise. At the final ceremony, Chef Laurent announced his scholarship offer again in front of everyone. He also announced that he was creating a special program at his institute, just for traditional techniques. He wanted Sarah to be the first teacher. She accepted, finally ready to step into her role as a master, not just a student. As Sarah stood on that stage, holding her second-place trophy, wearing her grandmother's old apron, she thought about how far she had come, from a school cafeteria to a national competition, from hiding her skills to teaching them, from being invisible to being seen. Her grandmother had been right. The tradition did deserve to be shown, and Sarah was no longer just a simple cafeteria worker. She was a keeper of heritage. She was a bridge between past and future. She was exactly who she was always meant to be.